Stage one of a geographical fieldwork investigation is identifying a question. As we look at this, you may find it helpful to have the Independent Investigation student booklet to hand. That's got all the notes from the video, but also a number of activities for you to carry out in order to form your own research question. You can think of a geographical investigation as a bit like an hourglass. So you choose a broad topic that you're interested in, but you've got to then narrow that down to something which you can realistically investigate. Partly that's by narrowing down the topic to a particular aspect of interest, but it's also about choosing a place in which you can carry out your investigation. Having done that, you'll then be able to place what you've learnt from your investigation into a broader geographical context. You'll be able to add to the body of knowledge and understanding about geography for that particular topic. When forming your research question, you need to have a few considerations in mind. Your research question must be geographical. That sounds fairly obvious, but there's all sorts of things you could investigate and may be interested to investigate. But your topic must be based on something which is inherently geographical. The way that we ensure that is by making sure that you choose something that is from the Geography A level. Secondly, it must be a researchable topic. Within the broad scope of the Geography A level, there's plenty of topics that are very interesting and could be worth researching, but may not be feasible for you as an A-level geographer to go about researching. You need to think what is feasible in terms of the equipment you have access to, the timescale that you've got to carry out your research, your own skills and understanding. All of those will play a part in deciding whether a topic is researchable or not. And it's also got to be of an appropriate scale. So the choice of your place or location to carry out your fieldwork is really key. But choosing something of an appropriate scale is important because you've only got a limited amount of time to carry out your fieldwork, your data collection, and you don't want it to be too big. So rather than choosing a whole town, it might be just one ward. Rather than choosing a whole upland area, you choose a particular glaciated valley. And lastly, your question needs to be clearly defined. So within your question, you're likely to include some geographical terms, maybe some variables or factors that help you to define clearly what the focus and purpose of your research is going to be. It should be obvious to anyone looking at your question what it is that you're going to be carrying out data collection on and what it is you're going to be finding out about during your investigation. Well, let's have a look at a couple of questions and consider them under those 4 different categories. So here's a question that you could potentially investigate related to the water cycle. How do flows in the water cycle vary over time in the River Granta drainage basin? You might look at that and think that's quite a good question, but let's have a closer look. So is it geographical? Well, yeah, definitely. It covers the water cycle. That's a topic in the A-level course, so it ticks that box. Is it researchable? Well, there are a range of flows in the water cycle that you could investigate. You could measure precipitation, you could measure evaporation, infiltration rate, stem flow. There are lots of different flows that you could investigate. What about scale? Well, the River Granta drainage basin is quite specific. It's a very relatively small scale area, and so yeah, you probably could carry out a reasonable piece of data collection within that drainage basin. But is it defined? Arguably not. Looking at that question, you don't know which of the flows in the water cycle are going to be investigated. It may be helpful, therefore, to be a bit more precise about those flows. Other things to consider with a question like this is that it may be hard for you to establish change over time. That can be true both in the natural environment as well as the built environment. Your data collection is going to be limited to a period of a couple of days. And so while you may be able to access some secondary data that could help inform your understanding, the ability to investigate change over time is going to be limited. You might also think about the sort of rigor of your question. And with a question like this, there's the potential to add a bit more depth and rigor to it by considering different factors that might influence those flows. So you might think about things in this case like land use or geology or gradient. All of those could add an extra element to this investigation. But with a bit of refining, this could be a good question. What about this question from the places topic? How has the place identity of Cambridge been shaped by globalization? Let's analyse that. Was it geographical? Certainly geographical. It links to a couple of key different topics within the course, and therefore we can say yes, it is geographical. Is it researchable? Well, there's certainly a few different methods we could use and employ to investigate the place identity of Cambridge. We could carry out some surveys, we could carry out some questionnaires, and all of that would help us to establish and collect data about Cambridge's place identity. What about scale? Well, Cambridge is a relatively big town, and actually to do this project justice, to do sufficient depth of fieldwork, you might be better in this case to focus on a particular area or ward within the city. Maybe that would be looking at one particular road to help you go into much greater depth. Generally, in your investigations, depth is going to be greater and more beneficial than trying to cover a larger area in less detail. And is it defined? Well, the key concepts are defined, but perhaps there will be particular aspects of place identity that you may want to have a look at. Can you also establish whether it has been shaped by globalization, or do you need to consider other factors that may have influenced Cambridge's place identity as well? But again, this could potentially be a good question with a little bit more work. But what about your question? What question are you going to choose for your investigation? That is a difficult thing to decide on. Two things that you might like to do in order to help you start to narrow down your focus. You might like to think about topics that you've found really interesting and enjoyed. It might be something that you haven't yet covered that much, but which is in the A-level specification. You could equally choose something from those as well. And you might like to think about places that you can access. Maybe this will be in your local area, or maybe you're able to travel further afield, somewhere else in the UK, or perhaps even in the rest of the world. Thinking about both those aspects, topic and place, can help you to narrow down your options in order to start to form some thoughts about the question that you might choose for your investigation. But having got some initial thoughts, you need to do some reading. You need to go and find out a little bit more about the topic. There's lots of different places you can go. You might look at some geography journals or more readily available magazines as well, like The Economist. You might look at some textbooks. You might have a look online, see what's been in the news. There's lots of different things you can have a look at to read. As you read, you'll probably start initially with some fairly straightforward and simple resources. Maybe it's the course textbook that you've got, or perhaps it's a little bit of look at Wikipedia to get some ideas. But very quickly, you'll need to move into more specialist publications. And And eventually, you may even start to consider some academic papers as well, some journal articles. These are going to be harder to access and take you a bit more time and thought, but they'll be very worthwhile. And certainly having a few of those referenced within your project would be a really, really good thing to do. With whatever you're reading, it's important to ask yourself a few questions just to evaluate what it is that you're reading. Here's a few questions you might like to consider as you read books and articles that you come across. Is it peer-reviewed? Why was it written? Who wrote it? Is it still relevant? Does it contain data and specific information? And are there alternative views or opinions on this information available? All of those things basically mean don't take what you read at face value. Be critical about it and think, is this true? And is it relevant to my investigation? As you read, this is just the first bit of research that you'll do, which you'll continue throughout your investigation. So we just talked about how reading can actually help to inform the formation of your question. It can help you to see what else has been investigated related to your topic, give you some ideas about that, and help you put your topic into a broader context. But reading continues to be important at the later stages of your investigation. So in terms of deciding on methods, you'll need to do some reading in order to investigate how to actually carry out the fieldwork and what appropriate methods there are. And you'll need to, again, return to the reading when you analyze your data. You'll need to find sources that help you to explain the trends and patterns that you've found, and perhaps make comparisons to other places as well, either spatially, so in other places, or temporally, that's over time. And whatever you read, make sure you make a note of it, of what the source is, because you'll need to reference that at the end of your project. In fact, every time you draw on an idea or some information which isn't your own, which has come from some of your reading, you need to include a reference, and more on that later on. Remember that all the notes and some activities to support you in trying to form your own question can be found in the Independent Investigation Student Workbook. A student guide to the A-Level Independent Investigation is also very useful, and remember that can be downloaded from this website.